My name is Julia Ross, and I'm doing my oral presentation on Sylvia Plath, and I wrote my paper on the poem Daddy. I want to do an oral presentation about Sylvia Plath to give the readers a little bit more history about Sylvia, and so that they can understand her poems a little better. Down here are portraits of Sylvia. This one is a portrait in her early 20s. This one is also a portrait of her when she was in college. This is a portrait or picture of Sylvia Plath and her husband Ted Hughes. There's another picture of them two together. This is a picture of Sylvia and her two children. And there's another picture, but it's in black and white. Sylvia Plath was born in 1932. She was a confessional writer. And a confessional writer is when the author tries to describe the relationship to the situations that are occurring within their life. Sylvia Plath was a confessional writer, and you can see that in many of her poems. It's kind of like she was writing in her diary to vent some of her issues that were going on within her life. So it was kind of like her own way to let the feelings out. Sylvia had a mother and a father. Her father's name was Otto Plath, and he was originally from Germany, and he was a professor at Boston University, and he taught entomology. Her mother was Arula Schober, and she was from Austria, and she also taught at the Boston University. Plath also had one brother, and his name was Warren. Otto was a diabetic, but he was in denial of his condition, and in result he suffered a severe foot infection. In 1940, her father was hospitalized, and his foot was amputated, but the infection had spread further up his leg without the knowledge of the doctors, and he went into his bloodstream, and it took his life. Otto's death affected Sylvia greatly throughout her life. Sylvia became deeply depressed and swore she could no longer believe in God. In result, when Sylvia was 10 years old, she used a razor blade to gash her throat. This was her first suicide attempt. This horrible depression followed her throughout her life, and it's obvious in many of her poems, especially in the poem Daddy, when she has a lot of little bits and parts and verses that are for her father, saying that she wants to get back to him, and that saying that she idolized him. Along with her depression, when Sylvia was an adolescent, she suffered from insomnia and respiratory infections. Sylvia struggled to be normal and to fit in, so to make up for her loss of normality in her age group, she was an exceptional A student. Sylvia began writing poetry early and also sent them to publishers, hoping to be accepted in society and recognized for her maturity in writing. Sylvia graduated at the top of her high school class and went to Smith College and graduated in 1952. By 1952, Sylvia had many of her poems published but was still receiving rejections. In result to receiving the rejection, Sylvia slipped into another deep depression. In 1953, Sylvia crawled beneath her mother's house and took an entire bottle of sleeping pills. Soon after consuming the pills, Sylvia fell unconscious, and she then regurgitated most of the pills, and so in result she didn't die. But there was a missing report put across the Boston headlines, and however, a few days later, her brother Warren heard her moaning and groaning under the house and recovered her. So after Sylvia was recovered, she was taken to the hospital to undergo shock therapy, and shock therapy was known to be, in the 1950s, to be a good treatment for suicidal patients. Sylvia entered a scholarship competition, which she won, and her reward was a scholarship to Newnham, Cambridge in England for the years of 1955 to 1957. At Cambridge, during her studies, Sylvia met Ted Hughes and married him in 1956. They spent 6 years in England and 2 years in the United States. When Sylvia became pregnant, her and Ted Hughes moved back to England. They had 2 children, which were born in 1960 and 1962. Unfortunately, Ted and Sylvia separated in 1962, and their marriage is full of bitterness and conflict resulting in physical abuse. And that is very, very clear in the poem Daddy. She compares her husband to a Nazi, a vampire who sucks the life out of her, a swastika, which is the Nazi symbol. She describes herself as a Jew, that which, you know, he's a Nazi and she's a Jew, shows that she was the prisoner and was being beaten and starved, and there was a lot of negligence and abuse involved within the relationship. It was unfair, and she was oppressed within her own marriage. So moving on, Sylvia took the children and moved into a formal home of William Butler Yeats, and during the winter of 62 and 63, Sylvia once again slipped into another deep depression. Early one morning on February 11th, 1963, she sealed the cracks in the of the doors of her children's room, left them milk and cookies, and returned to the kitchen and turned the gas on. This was her third and last suicide attempt, and she succeeded. She died, and Sylvia died at the age of 30. When she died, she did not have a major reputation, but since the 1960s, her reputation has grown, and some say she is the greatest poet in the 20th century.